Hey everyone, and welcome to Seriously Risky Biz. This is our podcast here all about cybersecurity policy and intelligence. My name's Amberleigh Jack, and in just a moment I'll bring in Tom Uren, our policy and intelligence editor, to talk all about the Seriously Risky Business newsletter that has been published today. And you can, of course, find that, read it, and subscribe over at our website, risky.biz. But first, I'd like to thank the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation for supporting Tom's work here, and also Lawfare, who syndicate his newsletter and publish it on the Lawfare Media website. And finally, I'd like to thank our sponsor for this week's episode, which is Nebulock, and you can find them at Nebulock, nebulock.io. So Tom, g'day. Thank you for joining me.
G'day, Amberleigh. How are you?
Pretty good, thanks. And just been digging into, the first piece in your newsletter today, all about spyware and surveillance, basically. And you've had a look into a Jakarta-based company called First Wap, which is selling unethical surveillance as a service. And you've kind of used this company as a illustration that while there may be these crackdowns that are having an impact, especially on the big spyware players like NSO Group, there are still these companies that are waiting in the wings and happy to kind of pick up any slack and meet any demand. So tell me a bit about that, Tom.
Yeah, so there's a couple of reasons this company is interesting. One of them is that it is involved in exploiting what are called SS7 vulnerabilities. So vulnerabilities in the signaling protocol that telecommunications networks use to set up and tear down phone calls and send text messages. And so over the years, I've written a couple of times about these kinds of vulnerabilities. And last year, the FCC did a sort of quick probe into what the state was in the US. And so it's interesting to get the other side of that. So in that probe, the FCC asked US telcos, what's the story? What's going on? And everyone replied, yeah, everything's fine. We're doing all the right stuff. And so it's interesting to get the adversary side. So the story is that a couple of reporters from this outfit called Lighthouse Reports discovered a data archive, I guess, of the queries and results of a surveillance product. And they tied that product, which was called Altamides, to this company called First Wap, which is a Jakarta-based company that was actually set up by a couple of Europeans. And they set it up as a marketing SMS type company, but they basically immediately pivoted to surveillance. And they figured out that they could abuse SS7 to find out where devices were. And they can also now do things like intercept both phone calls and texts. And they go so far as to say that if you've got a service that relies on receiving a two-factor code, we can help you break into that. And including things like WhatsApp. They say, yeah, we can easily get into WhatsApp. I don't know if that's true. But the data archive that these reporters found covered about 7 years. And it had 1.5 million records or something like that. And so I'm taking each record as an individual ping to a device. Where are you? And they were able to mine that and figure out who and when people were being targeted. So all it has is the numbers. And so there's a huge amount of work to figure out going from a phone number to an individual. Now, one of the interesting things is that they found a whole lot of targeting of Americans. So, and in the US. So that's unusual because usually surveillance companies and spyware companies don't want to annoy the US government. And so they basically avoid targeting the US. But so the people they identified, Blackwater founder Eric Prince and Wojcicki, who is the wife of Google's Sergey Brin and the founder of 23andMe, which is a DNA testing company, a journalist, Raytheon executives and employees of telecoms and cybersecurity firms. And I'm sure there's others as well.
Wasn't there a just a random mention of Jared Leto in there as well.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. So there's an interesting overlap with Hollywood in this story, and some of the other ones as well. I wrote about this week, and so they actually approached this company, Lighthouse Reports, under the guise of being a potential customer. So undercover reporters. It's like
It's so good.
I know that appeals to you, Amberleigh.
Honestly, as a journalist, being able to go undercover would be just chef's kiss.
Yeah.
We were never allowed in my job. It was actually written into our clause that you were never allowed to pretend to be someone that you weren't. But the idea of going undercover to
Yeah, so these
on a sting.
two went to a conference in, I think it was Austria, and they spoke to First Wap's sales executive, and he was very forward-leaning, I guess, in terms of what he was willing to suggest that the company would do. And so they presented him with kind of very sketchy scenarios, like, if we were a mining company and we wanted to find out about the movements of some people who are agitating against us, would that be okay? And the executive provided yeah, we could do that. Now, First Wap, the company, has formally said, no, we don't do anything illegal. But the overall vibe you get, both from that data archive and from the undercover journalists' interactions with the sale executive, is that they would use cutouts and, distance themselves from the sale of the product. And yeah, you can do whatever you like with it.
I also kind of love you mentioned there as well that while talking to the undercover reporters, this guy seemed to kind of promote his business by saying, well, all these other spyware companies that are getting media attention have ethical principles now. We don't.
That's right, yeah. So I thought that was a very interesting part of the report. So this came from a Mother Jones article. So it was a collaborative investigative research. Mother Jones wrote about it, and they talk about how it appears that the government and media actions against someone like NSO Group, the company they describe sounds a lot like NSO Group, have actually had an impact. And so the executive talks about, yeah, I sent them a couple of customers, like presumably they wanted something more than what First Wap could provide, and they turned them down. And he says, they've got, air quotes, ethical principles now. And so that it seems like that those government actions and sanctions and media attention has meant that whichever company they're talking about has become more cautious about customers, and they're not taking sketchy customers anymore. So that was a positive sign of impact on the spyware market. Now, NSO Group has got a lot of government attention and a lot of media attention. First Wap is not the same product, like it's not as powerful, but basically the people who are buying it are trying to use it for the same sorts of purposes, and they're just flying under the radar at this point. And so it seems that there's no simple solution to SS7 being abused. Like, the protocol is the way it is. There's decades of investment in telco protocol stacks. We're not going to replace them anytime soon or even upgrade them anytime soon. So that company is going to just kind of exist. It's going to be a lot more cautious about undercover reporters, I think. So to me, the question was, will there be media attention and government attention on these sorts of companies that are existing? They're providing, I would call them abusive surveillance services, not abusive spyware services.
Yeah, right.
But it's the, same, but to a different degree.
Yeah, yeah.
And are they just going to continue existing like forever? I don't know. My gut feeling is that they will. I think this is an interesting example in that it has been shown to be targeting US people. And so that would you would think be a trigger for the US government to take action. This data is all historical. So it dates from 2007 to 2014.
Yeah.
So there's no actual evidence that they're still targeting US people. And so I don't know what the story is right now. I think it's the kind of thing where they're a company worth investigating. Certainly right now with the government shutdown, the US government will not have the capacity to do anything. Yeah. Maybe European governments will, because there's a fair few stories about targeting of Red Bull executives, targeting in the Czech Republic, other people in Austria. So it appears to be used quite widely.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of spyware, the NSO Group has looks like there's a deal with US investors to sort of acquire the company worth tens of millions of dollars.
That's right. Yeah. What really struck me about that is exactly that figure, tens of millions of dollars. Because at one point, NSO Group was at least notionally worth $1 billion. So there was a buyout in 2019 where the management, some of NSO Group and a venture capital partner bought out the then owners and that valued the company at $1 billion. So since then, there's just been bad news after bad news, like human rights abuses, stories about how it's been misused by different authoritarian regimes, government sanctions, both financial and putting them on a thing called the Entity List, which makes it hard to do business with them for the US. And so they've gone from $1 billion now to being bought for like tens of millions. Now, both of those figures are a bit rubbery, but that's like a massive, lighting dollar bills on fire.
Yeah, quite a fall from grace. I'm assuming tens of millions to mean what, between 20 and 99? So there's a fair bit missing from that number.
Yeah, I'm going to guess closer to 10 than 99. And so it seems to me this is a cautionary tale for anyone else investing in spyware, that if you get the wrong sort of attention, basically your business evaporates. Now, I'm a realist, and I think that there's demand for these kinds of products, and the best that governments can do is try and shape them to behave as responsibly as they can. Like, there are legitimate uses for these things. And so the question to me is, NSO has been bought by US private capital. Will that be a way of making sure that it runs on the straight and narrow? I guess we'll have to see, because, a couple of weeks ago I said that I think US investment in spyware is probably a good thing, because they've got all these incentives now to make sure that they're not misused. And I think that management attention makes a difference. And so we'll have to see.
If that was your intention to buy this company and make it better, it seems like a pretty good time to do it. I mean, you're getting a really good deal. Yeah,
so interestingly, this is the other Hollywood interaction. One of the main partners in this deal has produced a whole lot of Hollywood films, including, I think, like Happy Gilmore. Yeah. Now, what strikes me about Hollywood movies and spyware is that they're both like very risky investments in the terms of how do you know if a film's going to appeal to people? I don't know. And so the guy, I think Simons,
yeah,
must have a high appetite for risk.
Yeah.
And he actually tried to buy NSO Group a couple of years ago for more money. So I think he's, probably happy that he's getting NSO Group at, it must be close to the bottom.
Yeah.
If not at the absolute bottom. It seems like there is actually the potential to do pretty well out of this deal.
Yeah.
Of course, he does have to keep NSO Group on the right side of, doing the right thing. So we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. You'd definitely be pretty stoked, if you had a deal that fell through a couple of years ago, and then You landed yourself on this one.
Yeah, one of the interesting stories I came across in researching this is that it was sold in 2019. Some of the owners bought it in collaboration with this a group called Novalpina Capital. And the press got so bad that the wife of one of the Novalpina Capital principals, she had to resign from her job as chairman of an art trust because just her vague association with NSO Group was so toxic that she... So I guess the point is there that even though it's like money and it feels like you're divorced and separated from it, if the press gets bad enough, it still has ramifications for the people funding it.
Yeah, for sure. And your final piece today, Tom, taking a look at China's hacking competitions, and you're sort of saying the hacking competition scene has been completely co-opted by the state in China, and you take a look at the Matrix Cup, which I believe has replaced the Tefano Cup in
Tianfu. I think you're thinking of the Italian Tefano Cup, but this is the Chinese Tianfu Cup. The story is, in the time I've been writing this newsletter, the Tianfu Cup became this stunning exhibition of exploit development prowess. Like all sorts of very, very difficult targets would be like exploited by Chinese hackers. And they were doing better than other hackers in Western competitions. And so the Tianfu Cup has actually disappeared. Like it hasn't been run the last year. And instead, it appears that it's been replaced by this thing called the Matrix Cup. Now, what's super interesting about the Matrix Cup is that the chairman of the organizing committee is actually the founder of Chihu 360. And he's got this particular view that, in fact, hacking competitions in the West were run by intelligence agencies, and that the purpose of them was to take both the exploits and the techniques that were being developed and to siphon them off like the use of intelligence agencies. Like now, we know that doesn't happen here, but he explicitly set up the Matrix Cup to do that for China. And he said the results will stay in China and be used for the state to defend cybersecurity. So he actually said that at the opening address of the Matrix Cup. And his view was that, Chinese researchers were going overseas to these hacking competitions and were getting money, but the money was far outweighed by what Chinese researchers were giving up, which was the actual vulnerabilities themselves and the techniques that they were using. And, I think the Americans were getting our services for free, is what he said. So it seems like pretty explicitly, he's setting up the Matrix Cup to do what he thinks Western competitions are doing. So it's a competition to find talent and techniques and exploits and set them aside for state purposes, or like at the very minimum, it's to improve Chinese domestic cybersecurity. But it sounds like more than that.
Yeah. Sure.
So the Matrix Cup, interestingly, it's relatively opaque. So instead of saying VMware, for example, they might say, best vulnerability goes to a vulnerability in a leading global virtualization management platform. So this is from the official write-up of the host, basically.
Yeah.
And so I just thought that this was fascinating, that it's gone from, the West had hacking competitions and China had none. China had hacking competitions and its researchers were actually forbidden from going overseas. Those hacking competitions were like somewhat normal in that they were transparent and you would see the results and you would see the targets. And now they're quite opaque. There hasn't even been one announced this year. Has one taken place? I don't know. Maybe, probably. You'd probably bet on it if that was if the purpose was for feeding the state. You would say, well, of course you would hold one.
Yeah, right.
And so I think that this is just a really interesting change that I hadn't written about before because nothing had happened.
Yeah.
because
yeah.
it was hidden away, I guess.
All right, Tom, we may actually leave it there, but thank you so much for joining me today to talk through the Seriously Risky Business newsletter, which you can, of course, read on our website, risky.biz. But Tom, have a great week, and we'll see you again same time next week.
Thanks, Amberleigh.